you start to see significant DBH depending upon the species, and canopy coverage of 50% plus about 7 to 10 years or so. And I'm just throwing that off. You know, it varies from site to site. It varies obviously for the mix of the species that are planted in that particular site, but it takes some time. What's surprising to me is that it doesn't really take as much time as you might expect it to when you're looking at that little tiny seedling that you just planted in the ground. They go faster than you would expect. Maybe that's just a byproduct of getting older and life speeding up. I don't know. But from what I've seen in the last 3 years on that one particular project, I've been amazed at how quickly some of those trees really put on above ground growth. Particularly the trees, and I'm looking at the list, Deborah, and the super trees list, the 14 super trees list. And it is funny how well that list matches up with the trees that we see grow fastest.
Fabulous. Oh, good.
It really is. It's pretty funny how well that lines up.
That's great. And I don't know if you talked about super trees already, but if for those that don't know what we're talking about, if you go to the Houston Wilderness website, click on programs and POH trees, you'll see what we're talking about on the 14 super trees. So
yeah,
thanks,
14 man. Trees that are really good at sequestering carbon. They have great growth rates down here. They also sequester other volatiles and pollutants and whatnot. And of those 14 that you've got on that list, we regularly plant about 12 of those.
Fabulous.
And they're the top 12. The ones at the bottom that you got on that list I'm looking at is loblolly and tulip tree. Don't know that we plant too many loblolly pines or tulip trees.
It's understandable.
Yeah. But most of our stuff is in the elms, the sycamores, the maples, the ashes, the oaks. Those are all things that we regularly plant on our projects.
That's great. And I know I was off for a little while thanks to my electricity going out and Wi-Fi. So with the thunderstorm, did you already cover a good bit of what was on the Q&A? I have some more here that were also sent in.
We finished Mary Talley's
all right.
question. That's where we're
at. If you want to address what's next, I actually can no longer see the Q&A. So
no problem. Nancy Edwards asked, how long will the trees you plant survive being inundated? Man, y'all must have a camera up in my office or something, because these questions are really, really pertinent. I mean, obviously it depends on the species, Nancy. You know, some of these trees can handle inundation for quite some time. Bald cypress, green ash, those types of trees that are wetland trees. Once they get above the water, I mean, they might not thrive if they're continuously inundated, but they probably won't just all die out. But for the most part, you don't want to leave these trees inundated for multiple weeks and months, especially the mixes that we plant. And so we work our sites and we design our sites so that water pulses through the system as best we can. It'll come in. A lot of our sites are designed so that we slow hydrology down across the site if we're trying to restore a wetland system, for example, or even if we're just trying to get enough water out there for vegetation to survive. We will slow water down coming across the site, sheet flow and whatnot, but we won't store water. And I forget if it's retention or detention, which word you use there as far as flood control district uses, but we're looking to slow it down and let it pulse through the system and go on its merry way versus inundate these trees. But what's interesting is on that boat art project in particular, we had planted about 3/4 of the 2,000 acre mitigation site there in the upper part of the reservoir near Bonham last winter, and it was looking great. We were very excited, and that tree mix was a wetland tree mix. It was wet oaks and elms and ashes, and then we just got this wet winter, and water sat on those trees through the spring for a couple of months, and we thought we would have lost all of them. But now we've been going back and doing survival studies, and we're finding that most of our trees survived that, even the Wintergeddon and then the ensuing flood and inundation for basically a month. They sat there with water on top of them after all that abuse. Most of those trees, I think we're at probably 80% survival or so, are doing okay. Now, the ones that suffered the most were the oak, the elms and the ashes, and those types of trees, the soft mass producing trees. It affected them, but not really significantly. The oaks definitely took it harder on the chin than those soft mass producing trees. All right, you want me to keep
That's
on
great.
going?
Sure.
That's Nancy. Justin Bauer, do you know what the ratio of offset was? How many acres of mitigation per impacted acres? So I'll take that first with the with the Boat Ark project, and then I'll apply that question just in general. So on the Boat Ark project, because it was so unique, Justin, it was a permittee responsible mitigation project. Did not, to the best of my understanding, have any sort of ratio applied to it because you had such a massive impact, 17,000 acres. Just the simple fact that they could acquire and line up for restoration a almost 1-for-1 acreage amount, I think was a Herculean effort, and the fact that that water district did it is a real testimony to their commitment to offset their impact to the greatest extent that they practicably could. Most projects, though, you're right, there's some sort of a ratio, or they run some sort of a functional assessment on the impact, and then they apply that functional assessment to the mitigation, and they make sure that you're putting the same ecological function back on the ground as you have impacted on the project, and that's more what we're used to seeing. Not too many districts, and we work nationwide. Res works nationwide, and we do all kinds of things, but mitigation is part of what we do. In my role as director regulatory, I see a lot of districts approach ratios differently, and it used to be every district, that's what they did. You had a ratio. If you're going to impact forest or wetlands, it's 3-to-1. If you're going to impact emergent wetlands, it's 2-to-1, or whatever, or some other combination. Most districts I work with, or we work with today, favor a functional assessment approach over a ratio approach. There are still districts that apply ratios, and from what I can tell, you're usually going to see 3, 4, 5-to-1 and up, depending upon the type of mitigation that you're proposing versus your impact. So I hope that answers your question.
Matt, could you just explain what you mean by 3 to 4 to 5-to-1?
I apologize. So the ratio. So 3, if you impact 1 acre of wetland, you replace 3, 4, 5, 6, 10 acres for every 1 acre that you impact, depending upon the quality of that wetland and the type of the mitigation that you're proposing, whether you're proposing to completely restore something or simply enhance something, which is a lighter amount of effort, or just preserve it, which doesn't really require on the ground effort. It just requires, conservation easement effort and whatnot. So depending upon the mix of those two factors, the ratios, where they still use ratios, will go up.
And I know we've got more questions, but I wanted to ask, in our greater Houston, 8 county plus 13 plus county area, there are just multiple mitigation banks going on, correct? Our stream mitigation.
Yes, there are. And if you go on, if there's interest in that and people are not already aware, there's a website called RIBITS, RIBITS. It is the Corps of Engineers and U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service now repository for all mitigation credit that's being generated around the nation, and all of the mitigation banks. And they've got a really great interface. It runs through Google Earth. If you're interested in that, you want to see where these things are, these types of projects are in your area, it's very easy to get on that RIBITS website. Just Google RIBITS. It'll take you right to it. And you can see how these things line out. Right now, I think I saw it in the video, Kim, just a quick dots on a map of how many projects are in the 8 county region of Houston Wilderness. It's well over a dozen, and many more are being proposed. Probably a dozen more are being proposed. Res has 2 of those mitigation banks are running that we have right now. A third is in the pipeline for approval, in the not too distant future. And then we have many permittee responsible mitigation projects in this region as well that were assigned to specific permits that were issued by the Corps, not just open banks where you sell credit to permittees. So there's a lot of this going on, and folks may not realize it. I mean, it's just kind of it's just continued to grow and grow and grow over the years.
Do you find that you do most, and now we'll go back to the Q&A. Do you find that pretty much every mitigation project you do, even along the coast, involves a certain amount of tree planting in addition to grasses?
Yes, with the only exception being our shoreline stabilization projects and marsh, like salt marsh restoration work. We generally don't see much of a tree component to that, but most everything else we do, and it's because it's a lot of the Gulf Coast south of the southwest of the piney woods, you didn't have many trees historically, but over the years you had a lot of prairies, prairies and wetlands. But over the years, you've had a lot of trees become naturalized, native trees become naturalized further and further south, and where those trees have come in and forested wetlands have developed as those trees have taken over. The Corps requires offsets for that, for the same type. That, if it's a forested wetland, even down in Brazoria County or further south, then they're gonna require that same type of offset.
Okay, thank you. So we'll head back to the questions.
I got a really good one from Dana Karcher here. I see on the list that green ash is being planted. Is there any concern for emerald ash borer that has wreaked havoc on urban forests that surround major cities from the East Coast to Denver? Absolutely, yes. I have seen the devastation, Dana, firsthand, that the emerald ash borer can wreak. Why it does not seem to have made an appearance yet this far south, I don't know. But we're realists. We would not be surprised to see emerald ash borer show up, start tearing up our trees. At that river by Bodark mitigation project, or the river by range component, we actually have emerald ash borer traps set up around the perimeter of the mitigation site to detect if and when they come in and show up, so that we're ahead of the game. But green ash is just such a responsive plant. You put it in the ground, and I mean, it just takes off. And so it's hard for us to just keep it out of our mixes. For one thing, it's going to come in by naturally anyway. But it's hard for us to justify keeping it out of our mixes. It's not the largest part of our mixes. I mean, most of our mixes have 5 or more species in them, so you can imagine, you're going to see more than 20% or 15% of a tree sapling mix or seedling mix composed of green ash, and we overplant by almost double what you really need to see in a mature forest situation as far as trees per acre. And so even if we do have an influx of emerald ash borer, and they do kill all of the trees, all of the green ash trees, it will take out a component of our reforestation, but it would not take out the reforestation effort itself. Great question.
And it's a super tree, by the way. So
it is. Even if in the meantime, I mean, it is doing it's providing some really good ecosystem services. And even if, heaven forbid, the ash borer showed up and girdled these trees and they end up dying, those dead snags themselves also are a major habitat component within these forested systems. I mean, it's part of our long-term plans that if we have to do tree thinning operations in order to get our tree mixes, our hardwood canopy versus soft mass canopy ratios back in line with what's required for the project, that we go in and kill certain species of trees or certain individuals and leave them right where they're at, because they add so much more habitat value to those forests for detritivores, for bird species that like open areas to land, like raptors and things like that. All kinds of critters use those snags in those forested areas, and so they are in themselves a valuable component. All right, let's see. Next one. Let's see. I'm trying to get to a question. Best trees to plant in riparian zones. This is from Tony Estrada. Best trees to plant in riparian zones forests that help with erosion control along bayous. Well, Tony, I probably have some folks on this call that can answer that question better than me. And I think my contact information will be available after this, Deborah, for
Yes,
folks
yeah.
you'd send it out to. So you're welcome to send me an email, and I'll get you hooked up with folks that can get you more detailed lists specific to an area that you're particularly interested in. But a lot of what we, for erosion control purposes along these bayous, and especially these stream restoration projects that we do, we come in and we use a lot of live stakes. And by live stakes, what I mean is we go cut limbs off of riparian trees, and a lot of those tree species will come back, will resprout from cut limbs or cut stems or whatnot. We shove them in the banks of those streams, and we get very good success with regrowth from those types of trees. In fact, just to show you, give you a little example, because I like to, picture's worth 1,000 words sometimes. I can find
Well,
it.
and while you're pulling that up, Matt, I could also mention to everybody that if you can look at some of the prior virtual TSIG forums that we've done, including the one from Nick with Harris County Flood Control District, and he covers a bit of that question, Tony, as well. So.
And so, like on the projects I've been involved with so far in Texas, and you can see from this picture, you can see our crews going in and putting in live stakes, installing them on top of our erosion control matting and whatnot. These are a mix typically of black willow. Black willow does it extremely well. Cottonwood, box elder, sycamore will respond well to this as well. And I'm sure there's another 3 or 4 species, but they're all common to down here. This is that same site about 9 months later or so, and you can see the cottonwood seedlings coming up from those live stakes, and some of the green ash is mixed in there. And then this is about a year after live staking in that same site, and you can see where we are as far as the live stakes that have come back, especially that black willow. Once it gets roots growing and it's in the water, they take off like crazy. But the cottonwoods come back too, and then of course box elder and sycamore do the same thing. So hopefully, I'm guessing you can see that. Hopefully you can see that.
Yes, we can see it. Looks great.
Oh, good. Okay, yeah. I got it. So
and speaking of Nick, I think he's got the next question. I can see him again. So.
All right, let me see where we're at here. Let's see. I got Nick Griffin.
Yeah.
How long will you be actively managing and or monitoring the mitigation site? Do you have success criteria you're trying to meet? Yes, Nick, absolutely. I wish I could. Well, I can show it to you here. This is the contract for that mitigation project. If you can see, it's as tall as my head. It includes a section about that thick on success criteria, most of which came straight out of the permits from the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers and Texas Commission on Environmental Quality, most of which are pointing back to the mitigation plan that was developed over the 10-year course of their permitting effort with those agencies. So we've got a very thick list of success criteria specific to each individual habitat. Multiple success criteria for each habitat include what you would expect as far as the vegetation coverage, size of the trees, canopy coverage of the trees, composition of the trees, and then a whole litany of other things. A lot of it geared toward about a dozen different keystone species and their habitat needs within those different habitats that we're restoring there on that particular project at Bodart. And that's typical for all of our projects that have some tie back to a mitigation component for a federal or a state permit. So we're used to seeing that. But you ask how long will we be actively managing and or monitoring the mitigation site? That particular mitigation site, over 20 years. My projections are we'll be monitoring out through 2042 at this point. So hopefully I'll still be around to see that, and hopefully I'll be retired by that time. But it is my intent to make it that long. It seems like a long way off, but these projects, as you engage in these projects, they put you in a totally different mindset as far as time, and it goes by faster than you think when your business is growing trees and restoring habitat. It's pretty amazing how quickly things click along for you. So I hope that answers that question. And just to add on, most all of our projects have some sort of long-term stewardship component or management component. We manage the project up until the time that it's required in the permit to do so, or in our contract to do so. That might be 5 years, it might be 7 years, it might be 10, it might be 20, as in case of the boat arc. Then we also are typically paired with a long-term steward in perpetuity, such as Houston Wilderness holds some of our what's the term I'm looking for, Deborah?
The bond guarantee, yeah.
Obligee component. There are also nonprofit organizations that act as long-term stewards on our conservation easements. Bayou Land Conservancy here locally, a big shout out to Bayou Land Conservancy. They serve that role on several of our projects. They do an amazing job. Katy Prairie Conservancy serves in that capacity as well on some projects. And then there's a whole list of others that come alongside and then carry the management or the maintenance, long-term stewardship, I should say, of a site into perpetuity. So, yeah.
Well, and let me mention, and that's great, Matt. And let me mention that I know most of the folks, and by the way, thanks to everyone for calling in. Nice big group. They're in what we see. We can see it driving around the freeways or in various parks, etc. That you can plant a tree here in our region, and within a couple of years, if it's getting enough water, it's just going to take off. And so, yeah, there certainly is maintenance involved, and there's required statutory regulatory maintenance for mitigation banks, but generally for trees themselves, they do well here, and in all types of species, and they do well in that forestation style, as we often see. Like I said, when you're driving along the freeway, we can watch a new planting, and within a couple of years, it's grown way up. So, which is really fun. So I know we're getting close to the hour, but I know we're getting more questions, which is great. Let me let you know, Matt, Jim has asked, and I think there's a couple questions on the bare root seedlings. When planting bare root trees, what percentage of mortality do you find, or I'm sorry, do you plan for? What, mortality rate? And then do you do any watering of the large tracts of bare root trees?
Those are great questions, Jim. As far as the percent mortality, well, we're typically planting 400 to 500 trees per acre, bare root seedlings. You need about 100 to 200 to make it to maturity. Have what most in most of our experience as far as requirements are concerned from core permits or mitigation plans, that's the target that they're looking for. It's between 100 and 200 trees per acre in a mature forest. And if you think about walking through a mature forest down here on the Texas Gulf Coast, that's about right. You're gonna find about 100 or so mature trees per acre and have a pretty close to 60 to 80% canopy coverage or so, maybe sometimes closed canopy coverage. That's what we're looking for. So, in some of our planning efforts, we can have 80% mortality and still be on track to meet that success criteria. More often than not, fewer trees die than we expect, and we're really looking at now as we're getting into some of these projects that are much older, we're kind of having to do some forestry and think about coming in and doing some timber management on some of these sites in order to thin some of the trees back to allow some of those more desirable species to kind of get larger canopies and have a greater dominance in some of these areas, especially the oaks and the hard mass producing trees. So that's, if that answers your question. As far as the irrigation is concerned, yes, we do plan to irrigate. Some of our projects, it's required that we be set up to irrigate. Very rarely have I seen it needed in the last 4 years since I've been at Res. Now, we've been through droughts where obviously that's critical to have those irrigation systems. But a lot of times we set up our irrigation systems and we haven't even really had to turn them on. Some of that's because we're planting so many trees. If we hit a dry spell for a month or two and we lose some trees, but we're still on the way to get the forest, well, then it doesn't really matter. The other thing, you have to be careful in irrigation. We learned some lessons here recently in Texas. Areas that have been long-term irrigated that are using surface water coming out of like rivers. The Red River was a good example. They have a tendency to build things up in the soil from those irrigation efforts. On the Red River, we found out that sodium can become a problem and can throw off your pH in your soils, which is not good for certain species of trees. So you have to be careful about how you engage in irrigation and how long you engage in irrigation some of these tree species.
Well, and that goes back to, doesn't it, Matt, to soil prep? If you've put in a lot of microorganisms and bacteria and fungi, then the soil kind of helps those trees along during those drier periods and that kind of thing, and sort of serves that role.
That's true, right? Yeah. And if you're planting larger trees, there are things you can do. If you're doing smaller projects and larger trees, there are things you can do, with gels and stuff to provide hydrology for them through dry spells without having to set up irrigation systems. But still, when it's needed, and we do it. We set them up.
Got it. Well, we'll let I think KG close out the questions. He's got two. Any special procedures you've taken to ensure survival of live stakes, and how have they done in areas with shade? Well, actually, that's the first part. And then there's one question after that. I'll let you answer that.
I got it. KJ, I'd have to send you an email with more specifics. All I know from my personal experience on these projects is that it's hit or miss with the live stakes. Sometimes they just take off like those pictures I showed you, but then in some areas, for whatever reason, they don't, and then we got to come back and re-live stake them. What I do know about live stakes is they're very cost effective and very efficient. They're not hard to procure. They're not hard to install. If they don't take the first try, if we wait a little longer in the winter and try them again the next winter, they typically, just by sheer numbers of live stakes, we finally get the place reforested, and still at a very cost-effective manner and a very efficient manner. As far as the shade, I haven't really noticed an issue with shading them out, but I could see that as being a problem if you're in a mature riparian zone already and you're trying to grow black willow or something like that. You're probably not going to have as good a success.
That's a good point. And then the last question here, and let me say real quick that in the large scale tree planting manual, which all the tree strategy and implementation group members have been a part of, we address some of these more technical items there too. And based on some of these questions, we're continuing to add to that manual. We'll address some of these additional items as well. So final question, and then we'll wrap it up for today. Can you explain a little bit on how you finalize on a specific site for restoration? Is there a specific criteria there?
I'm taking that to mean how you close out a site. I think that's what KJ is asking for. Like we use the term close out, like we're done. It's restored and we're done with our stewardship component, and we're ready to walk away and everybody's happy. As I answered before, most all our projects have some sort of success criteria that have to be met before we're done and we're able to close out the site. So we have to go through those every time, make sure that we have the correct trees, species or whatever species that we're replanting. They're in the right proportions. They're in the right coverage. And then let's see, what was the rest of the question there, Deborah? I lost it.
Oh yeah, well, basically you're answering it.
That's the approach. I mean, there's a contract, there are requirements. We have to go down a list, meet all those requirements, just like any other development, or contract provider, or contractor, and then we wrap the project up and give it to a long-term steward typically, and then go to the next project.
Okay, that's great. I did have one more that I know that somebody wanted to ask, and so we'll sort of wrap it up with this one because we're right at an hour. Any pitfalls or lessons learned, particularly from your experience with the large-scale native tree plantings, that like, wow, we wouldn't do that again?
I could do a whole nother forum on that. You need another hour for the lessons learned, Deborah, or a day. Short answer is yes. Lots of pitfalls and lots of lessons learned. Res is now 11 years old or so, and we've acquired and brought on team members, other companies and whatnot that add to that experience, going back another 30 years. So yes, we've got 30 plus years of lessons learned and experience in this company now about what to do and what not to do, and we're still adding to that daily. Out there just to draw the an example from that boat arc project, I did mention that former turf farm. We did learn a lot of lessons trying to re-vegetate that area, trial and error, and finally going back and reanalyzing the soil and going back and talking to different experts, soil experts and revegetation experts, until we finally settled on what was going to be the best thing to do to restore it. So short answer is yes. I would add to that, and I've got this tacked on my monitor here by my computer. Farmers who wait for perfect weather never plant. If you try to ensure that everything's going to work out perfect, exactly according to plan, you'll never get the project done. So a lot of what we do here at Res is we plan as much as we can, and then we trust that we're going to be able, because we have such great people here and they really love what they do, that we will be able to adapt to whatever nature throws at us, whatever curveballs we get. And more often than not, we do, and then for the times where it's tougher, well, we eventually figure it out. It may just take a little bit longer.
That's good. That's good advice. I think whether you're planting, 10 by 10 feet or you're planting, 10 by 10 acres. So
you got to start somewhere.
That's right. Thank you, Matt, so much. Another great forum. We have a couple more left in the series that you all will hear about in the next, few coming weeks. Thank you again for calling in. Thank you, Matt, for all your the work that you're doing and that RES is doing and other mitigation bank companies. And we look forward to seeing you all again sometime soon. Take care, everybody. Have a great day.
Thank you, Deborah.
Thank you.